Hi everyone, can you hear me? Great. Great. First and foremost, thank you very much to Ryan for inviting me. This is the first time I'm speaking in person. Previously, I've spoken online via Zoom. It's been a very interesting experience. But it's good to see everyone in the flesh. Today, what I want to do is walk through a story with you, which is the emergence of a field known as Islamic science. Just a quick show of hands. Have you guys heard of the field of Islamic science? Yeah, a few of you have, a few of you, most of you have not. Oh, okay, quite a few of you have, right? So what I want to do is do a historical overview, going through contemporary time, and then see what kind of developments have been made in this sector. So you can stretch back Islamic science to as far back as you want. You can go back all the way to the time of Prophet if you wanted to. But the emergence of the contemporary conversation of Islamic science starts in the 1980s. For context, bear in mind that the Muslim world went through a dissolution phase. 1924, the Caliphate dissolved. Muslim nation states start emerging, right? And as a result of that, when Muslim nation states are emerging, the question about how do we start? How do we start building our country? How do we start building our societies? Education was a very important conversation partner, and science in particular was a very important utility. So there was a lot of import of Western curricula, be it from the States, UK, Scandinavian countries as well. And when this started happening, there were a group of scholars that were very concerned that we're borrowing or we're importing all this curricula, but we are not filtering it. And hence why you have this very famous tagline called Islamization of knowledge or Islamization of sciences. Hands up if you've heard of that term before. Yeah, a few of you got that. And so fundamentally, this trend that kicked off in the 1980s was spearheaded by four main interlocutors. These are Sayyid Hassan Nasr from Iran, who's in the States. You've got Naqib al-Abbas, who's in Malaysia, Ziad al-Sardar from your hometown here in the UK, and Ismail al-Faruqi, who passed away. These four individuals framed various ways of Islamizing. They had their personal disagreements. But all of them were united on two things. One, there are a lot of foreign or alien elements within science for education. And two, that needs to be filtered through an Islamic filter. The disagreements were about what that filter was and how extent it goes in terms of education. The other famous trend, and this is more well known, is the whole idea of scientific miracles in the Quran. Hands up if you've heard this before. I'm assuming this is most of you, right? So if you've ever been to a mosque and you see those shiny little booklets by a famous guy called Harun Yahya, right? So that's a very famous remnant of the past. And so this is a very, very interesting idea that emerged only in the past 50 years. The idea is very simple, that we have all these amazing advances in modern science, and a lot of these can actually be traced in the Quran. So we have the atom in the Quran apparently proves that. We have the Big Bang in the Quran, right? We have all kinds of things that modern science is just discovering. Does anyone know of the name of the individual who initiated this movement? Anyone have an idea? Just a guess? We can make this interactive? No? No one? Yes?
Is it the French?
French, what's his name? Yes? Maurice Bucaille. Excellent, very good. So give a round of applause. Well done, good. So Maurice Bucaille published this work. So my French is horrible, so I'm going to say it in English. The Bible, the Quran, and Modern Science. This was published in French. It was later translated into English, Urdu, Arabic, and several others. He, with the publication of this work, launched a whole new wave of thinking. Hundreds and millions of dollars were poured into conferences, booklets, dawah movements that still last with us today. So in the 1980s, these were the two conversations that were kicking off. One, which was Islamization, which interestingly was very suspicious of modern science. And the second one is the scientific miracles, which is very positive about science. So it's very interesting for me, as somebody who works in the field, that our reception of modern science starts on this very diametric way. Come 2000s, we now begin to see a further diversification of the field. So the two trends we looked at are still conversation partners, but people have started looking into other lines of inquiry. And because the field is still relatively young, the discussions are still kicking off. Some lines are mature than others, and naturally, because you have such a few number of people, disagreements emerge. So what are those new lines? First and foremost, there is a whole discussion about what is the methodological relationship between Islam and science. I'm assuming if I ask you this question, most of you say it's very positive, right? But then we have some certain sticking points that trigger it off in the Muslim space. These include things like evolution, right? Is that something we can embrace? You know what I mean? So there are different kinds of responses here. These are some of the important texts. The third one, for example, An Illusion of Harmony. This is written by an ex-Muslim. And he's a physicist. He says that there can never be a positive relationship between the two. It's an illusion, it's a facade. The other three disagree in their own way. Another very famous conversation point is physics and Islam. So we've had some really interesting developments in the field, particularly with things like quantum mechanics and general relativity. I'm actually teaching the fourth book today. I have it in case anyone wants to flick through it. So there are some interesting people. Basil al-Ta'i is a theoretical physicist. He's retired now. He's actually in Leeds. He's in the UK. And he's written a few ways where these two things, Islam and quantum mechanics, can speak to one another. So this is a very, very new inquiry. This is still something that's emerging, right? Another one is miracles, right? In the age and the dawn of science, can we as Muslims still believe in miracles, yea or nay? Or can we explain them away using things like quantum mechanics and other scientific theories? Can we have scientific explanations for the seas splitting apart, right? So just to give you an interesting example, I'm not saying this is correct, but this is just to get you to thinking. How do the tides change? Who knows? Any idea? What causes the tides to change? Yeah, I'll choose somebody else. Yes? Yeah, the moon, right? So the moon exerts gravitational forces. That's why we have high tides and low tides throughout the year. So one interesting theory that came up, right, that when Moses, he was there, Pharaoh was behind him, charging, one scientific explanation for that could have been that at that very moment, a comet was passing by, exerted gravitational force, and caused the seas to rest off. Bible, your name. I'll leave that to you. One of the most important discussions in this area is evolution, and arguably, I would say, in my experience, this is the number one reason for Muslims leaving Islam today. It's evolution. Right? I have spoken to people from around the world doing lectures on evolution, and arguably the most sensitive, most heated, most polarizing discussion in the field. Another line is medicine in Islam, and here this is going to be this is a very interesting space for doctors. Any medics here? Raise your hand if you're medics. Okay, cool. Just the one in the household is two. Okay, confused. Right, okay. So there are interesting technologies that are emerging. There's one really cool tech called ectogenesis, artificial wombs, right? This is no longer a proof of concept, a theoretical idea, it's a proof of concept that works. We can now, practically take a baby and put it outside of uterus, right? And let it grow for most of the 9 months. That's very interesting. China's actually investing into a factory that hopes to produce 5,000 babies every year by ectogenesis. Very interesting. That raises concerns about motherhood. That raises concerns about what is a woman, right, today. And that's just one conversation. There are many others, but just for the sake of time, I wanted to give you a specific example to see exactly how this field is kicking off. And this is where fiqh really kind of ties in with modern science, right? Another discussion which, that was highlighted earlier was psychology. So when we talk about psychotherapy, there is a discussion that a lot of these frameworks that we have in the university that are taught to us from school, this is based on a secular paradigm, right? Can we provide an alternative framework for this conversation, right? And this is, I would say, one of the maturest lines in the field. Malik, who passed away a few years ago, he's argued the father of this particular line. And you can see there's some interesting titles. One of the most fascinating conversations of this space is jinn possession, right? This is really kicking off, particularly, I don't know why, but in the last 2 years, I have feelings to do with movies. All right? But when you have possession, right? And when you do ruqya, right? There is a genuine question, how do you distinguish between an actual possession versus a mental health issue? Right? How do you draw that line? No clear answers yet. There are some that are coming, but no clear answers yet. Finally, we talk about infrastructure, we talk about decolonization. Have you guys heard of the famous trope that the Muslim world went to decline? Ghazali calls it decline. Ghazali shunned philosophy from the Muslim world. Ghazali shunned science from the Muslim world. And as a result, Muslims are barbaric, they don't have a proper civilization, and they have nothing to offer us. So, in the past 2 decades, a lot of very interesting historical scholars have done some amazing scholarship in this area, showing how this is very untrue, right? We have several manuscripts buried away in libraries all around the world, and they're unpacking those, discussing those, showcasing the vibrant activities that took place in the past millennium. Now, even though I showed you some interesting array of books, the field of Islam and science has still been relatively slow. If you talk about science realism today, particularly if you go on Amazon, you will see most of the books are written from Christian perspectives. And that's the dominant voice in the field. Arguably, that makes sense, because historically, they start off earlier, they have an infrastructure in place. The Western world did not go through a decolonization phase, infrastructurally that is. The Western world did not start nation states, right? We had to start that literally 100 years ago. Exactly 1924, 100 years ago from now, right? And so because of this, the field of Islamic science, relatively speaking, has not had the same burst, pace, and rate. Till now, there is no textbook on Islamic science, even though there are 14 from the Christian Handbook. Till now, there is no line, no research inquiry, no department dedicated to this space. It's also very difficult to have some of these conversations. I just moved here from one of the MENA countries, right? And I'm avoiding the name for specific reasons, right? But in that country, when I was working at a particular place, we were told to stay away from 3 conversations. One of them was evolution. Why? Because the year before, a professor talked about evolution, and it's in the textbooks, but because he talked about it, he was fired and deported from that country. So we can't even have that conversation in some spaces, right? Which is a shame. This is a problem. There's also a lack of expertise, right? It's a real shame that colonization affected us very deeply, right? We have people who are amazingly trained in seminaries. They know their fiqh, they know their hadith, excellent, well done. But when you ask them to speak about contemporary affairs, they struggle a lot. Vice versa. You get people doing quantum mechanics, relativity, engineering, medicine, right? But when you ask them to speak about some of the Islamic stuff, nothing really is connecting there, right? And I think that's the missing gap. And what Islam and science, I think, is doing is a term that my friend calls bridge building, right? There are many interfaces within science that require conversation, discussion, and production. And this is where we lack opportunities, because we lack infrastructure. Right? Now, I don't want to paint a doom and gloom picture. There have been positive developments, particularly in the past 2 years. In 2023, we saw the emergence of 2 book series. So just for those of you who don't know, a book series is when a publisher, Cambridge University Press, Oxford University Press, they invest in a particular line based on the critical threshold of a subject matter. So if a subject matter has reached critical threshold, they want to target and streamline productions in this area. In 2023, 2 publishers did that for Islam and science. The first one is Cambridge Elements. Hands up if you've seen Cambridge Elements before. Do you know what that is? No? So Cambridge Elements is an initiative by Cambridge University Press. It is designed to publish short booklets, 30,000 words, based on the track that it's in. So the Islam and Science track started off in 2023. That's actually the first book in this space. 2023, backed by Cambridge University. That's being co-edited by 2 colleagues of mine, Al Bassoum and Stefano Bigdardi. And the same year, Halgrave Macmillan also initiated the inauguration of the first monograph series for Islamic science, and I'm the chief editor of that. So if you have a book on Islamic science, want to talk about it, let me know. All right? So that's very good. And currently we have 12 books underway with this series. One of them is on AI and theology, the first monograph in English on AI and theology, Islamic theology in particular. The other thing that's happened is infrastructure buildup. So there are many institutions around the world focusing on science and religion. The top 3 in the world, interestingly, are in the UK. Right? Top 3 in the world are in the UK. The one that you see on the left-hand side, the Faraday Institute, this is an institution that is in Cambridge, not part of Cambridge University, but in Cambridge. Right? Some of the top scholars are working there. The other one is here in Oxford, called the Ian Ramsay Center. Have you guys heard of the Ian Ramsay Center? For those of you who are in Oxford? No. Okay. Yeah, we're about to finish somewhere, inshallah. Right, so that is here. And the other one is the School of Divinity at Edinburgh. Right? University of Oxford and Edinburgh are the only 2 institutions where you can do a full master's in science and religion as well as a PhD. Those are the only 2 institutions. And where Edinburgh has an edge over Oxford for now is that they offer their programs online as well. So one of the most interesting things about our online program is the first largest cohort are Christians, and the second largest cohort are Muslims from around the world who sign up for the program. Which is very interesting. And the reason I'm sharing this is because for the first time in the history of any of these institutions, they've hired a Muslim instructor, myself, and I'm part of Edinburgh. So we now have the ability to supervise PhD students, develop various lines, and inshallah, starting next year, once certain bureaucracy finishes, we will be also introducing the first course on Islamic science that will be integrated in their MSc program. So imagine you can study Islamic science at a Russell Group University, either in person or around the world, online. That's what I wanted to share with you in terms of the development of the field. In terms of my own research, I have mostly looked into evolution. I'm now slowly shifting into AI. I don't know if you can see this. Yeah, so I looked at extraterrestrials, aliens, and their impact on Islamic thought. And then more recently, I'm looking into now AI. The main thing that connects these 3 things, evolution, extraterrestrials, and AI, is how these conversations are affecting our understanding of human nature and uniqueness. We usually think that we're the best in creation. We usually have certain metrics in terms of identifying that we're the smartest, no one can be better than us. Those conversations are now being questioned in light of these discussions. So that's why I'm focusing more towards now this area. Speak to me more about this, but I just wanted to flag that up. That's the end of the slide. I welcome your questions. Thank you very much for listening.
Great, thank you so much, Shoaib. It's actually really nice having you in person because we've noticed Shoaib a couple of times. It's been online on Zoom, so it's lovely to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, it's question time. I want to start by asking, are there any online questions? Not at the moment, okay. If anyone's online watching, please do feel free to send in your questions. From the audience, who has any questions? Okay, there was one hand right at the back. Sorry, Marissa, making you walk away.
When you say Islam science, do you mean the rational science, the Islamic rational sciences like aqliyat, kalam, mantiq?
Right.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah, so just for context, in case people don't know what he's talking about, so we have something called the aqliyat, the rational sciences. These are mostly related to study of 2 topics. These are mantiq, logic, and philosophical theology, kalam, right? So that's one area that you look into. So for example, do things like AI question our understanding of human nature? Evolution, does it contradict Islamic beliefs? That will be in the aqliyat department. But if you remember, I also showed you stuff like medicine, which intersects not just with the aqliyat, but also with the fiqh and usul fiqh side, the jurisprudential side of things. So we have a few interesting people here in the UK One of them, for example, is Mansour Ali at Cardiff University. He focuses on things like organ transplantation. In fact, he is contracted for my series to write, I would say, the most exhaustive book on this matter. So I think it was in the Netherlands or Germany somewhere, there was a politician who reported in public that Muslims are taking our organs but not giving them, right? What that means is there was some opinion, public opinions, that Muslims can take organs but they're not allowed to give their organs to non-Muslims. That question is now very sensitive in this kind of multicultural climate, right? So he is investigating those lines and hopefully they'll be out soon. I hope that answered your question, Sidi.
Jazakallah khair. And one last thing.
Yep.
I've heard of an institute called Dar es Salaam, they're based in America.
Yeah.
And I think for the first time they're doing a takhassus in kalam, mantiq, falsafa.
Right.
Have you heard about them?
Right. Dar es Salaam is under the auspices of Sheikh Ahmed, right? So one of the, I would say, most senior scholars of the world, at least in the English-speaking language. And 100%, they've got a program. That's not the only place, though. There are many other places where Kalam is now being reignited. I'm working with somebody else who will be starting one online, and it's designed specifically for people who finish their Alamiya program, and they want to kind of fill in their gaps. Because one of the problems is that the Aqliya sciences are sometimes not taught too well. In seminaries I'm assuming you know what I'm talking about. And so to kind of fill in those pockets, myself and another sheikh, we're kind of doing this program that those gaps are there, but also they take you to another level in light of contemporary developments. So yeah, it's not just them, but that's definitely happening there. So no doubt about it.
Jazakallah.
Thank you so much for the question. I did see this hand up first, but we'll come back to you for another question, inshallah.
Sure, sorry, I'm not a social science. I'm not a science student, I'm a social science student. So I'm going to try and articulate it the best way possible.
I have no need for the insult, so.
Quickly speaking, when, we always have this discussion of, Muslims do a lot of inventions, blah, blah. I'm assuming the epistemic assumptions, as Shahir has put it very smartly, or the metaphysical assumptions of like what science was different in the pre-modern era and the post-modern era.
Yep.
Could you explain that? Because I just feel like that's extremely foundational and I don't get that. And I feel like a lot of us don't understand it in the way.
Right, okay. So that conversation requires a lot of unpacking, but I'll make it, at least introduce a starting point, right? It is 100% clear to anyone today that when we study science today, it means something very different to what science was 1,000 years ago. When we study science 1,000 years ago, we're largely looking at science through what is known as the Aristotelian framework, right? Aristotle was the biggest sheikh of the time, right? Every single civilization studied Aristotle. For 2,000 years, this man's work impacted the Muslim world, the Christian world, and the Jewish world, right? 2,000 years, from 500 BC all the way to 1500, right? Very important figure. And so when you look at all these classical aqliyat sciences or these traditional texts, they're buried in those old assumptions. So one of the assumptions is, for example, according to Aristotle, the perfect motion that you can have is circular motion, right? And in the celestial world, everything that you see in the sky is perfect. It's immutable, right? It's absolutely genuine. And it was those assumptions that fed into what is known as the Galileo affair. You guys know the Galileo affair? Man of science versus the church, right? That wasn't actually a science versus religion discussion. What happened was, in the 12th century, a very famous influential scholar called Thomas Aquinas, he rediscovered Aristotle's ideas, merged them with Catholic theology, such that if you question Aristotle, it was akin to questioning the church. Now, what was one of Aristotle's ideas? That those celestial bodies are perfect. So the moon is perfect, has no craters. The stars are perfect, has no craters. What did Galileo do? He built a telescope. He looked at the moon. And he saw what? Craters. Completely clashing with what Aristotle said. The church now gets fired up. This is a guy, one of our prominent scientists, he's not questioning what we usually hold to be our creedal stuff, right? And that's why we have to now kind of really revisit some of these classical texts in light of new frameworks. I'm not saying we abandon the ideas. I'm saying we adopt the same methodology, but update our knowledge base. And I think that's where the challenge is. And that's what I was alluding to earlier. You have people who are brilliant in science, but don't know about the classical stuff, and vice versa, right? If you don't mind, can I share an anecdote? Is that okay? Right, so I'll give you 2 examples where ignorance on both sides can be very dangerous. Right, bacteria, can we see bacteria with our naked eye? No, we can't, right? So one interesting individual, in his tafsir, or in his explanation of Quran, he said, oh, bacteria, we can't see them, that must be the jinn. Right? So Surah Jinn for him was Surah Bacteria. So, right? Okay. So that's one kind of ignorance on that side. And then you have ignorance from the other perspective, where really interesting, scholar, but doesn't know much about contemporary stuff, in particularly science. So an individual who was very prominent, very well known, somebody asked him the question, how do planes fly? How do planes fly? So imagine if you're going from Edinburgh to London, right? Tell me how it works. His response was very interesting. He said the plane first goes through Aqsa, then it's its final destination. I repeat that. It goes through Aqsa, then it goes to its final destination. Why? What was his dalil? What was his basis? Because the Prophet in Isra wa Mi'raj, he first went to Aqsa, then he went to the heavens. Right? Now you laugh at that, right? But you see where blindness and ignorance on both sides can be damaging today. That's why we need this space.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Thank you, Mitchell.